pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hartzell, here. Missing. Mortimer.
Here.
Halbert.
Here.
Tupin.
Here. All right, agenda approval.
Motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Against? All right, number 2, Multiple Advisory Funding Options and Project Development. Come on up here, buddy.
How you guys doing?
All right.
Good. There you go.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for letting me come and present to you all. And I think one of the things that we want to do is just kind of give you an update of what we've been talking to Jennifer and Cameron about the upcoming projects for the city. Let you know, kind of having the opportunity to kind of hear kind of what our thought process is and kind of how we're going through things, where we see things, what the timing and expectation is and different things. And then pretty obviously to open the floor for you guys answering, asking questions or anything that you might have. And so that's what we thought it'd be good to just kind of have this time to kind of keep you all up to date on anything, on things. And so I put together this little presentation, going over the agenda. I think it's really good to first set the table and look at some comparisons, some key statistics on how City of Cuba compares to some other cities in the area. Look at your current structure of your payments for your outstanding debt, which is called debt service payments. Look how those are. Talk a little bit about the funding that we discussed for the phase, the project that's coming up. It's really 4 phases. Primarily looking at the first 2 phases, seeing how that goes, and then looking at phase 3 and 4 after that. Talk about timing, talk about the future needs and planning, and next steps that you might be able to see kind of going forward. Any questions? All right. So on page 3, I put together a little bit of comparison to similar Missouri cities to kind of give you an idea of where the city of Cuba kind of compares with different things. So we look at population growth from the census, tax revenue that the city brings in, general fund expenses of what the general fund expenses compared to some other cities, general fund balance, total cash balance that the city currently has, total outstanding debt that you have, and kind of compare it to some of the other cities in the area. We're using for the city of Cuba, we're using your budget. Grab most of the information from the budget. The one difference is total cash balance is the current cash balance. So that's as of today or fairly recently. So obviously that's a little bit different because that fluctuates throughout the year. So that's a little bit different. All the other ones are from their audits that we're able to find, and looking at their fiscal year end for those different cities they have. So it just kind of gives you more of just kind of how things look, because a lot of times I think we get kind of focused on us and kind of focus on what we do and not look at the broad picture of, well, how does it compare to other cities and stuff. So I thought it'd be good just to kind of set the table of showing, City of Cuba, you get some really good positive strengths, right? So, if you look at your taxes, tax revenue, it's very strong. Incredibly, you a really strong position to be in. And your total outstanding debt. If you look at the total debt that you have outstanding, you've been very fiscal with that, and so you have a very low amount of debt. And our goal is to keep it as low as possible going forward. So we're not looking to borrow a whole bunch or finance a whole bunch, but we want to be prudent. And I think that's one of the things too, is that debt is important and it's not all bad. So it's a little bit like, you know, if I remember when my wife announced that she's pregnant. We're very excited. This is our second pregnancy. Halfway through, we realized we're having twins. And so that kind of threw a wrench into things. And so we're talking about, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? We lived in a small business at the time. Should we build out the house? Should we get a new house? You have all these kinds of things that you kind of think about because things change, right? And so, unfortunately, we didn't have the wherewithal just to pay cash and be done with it. We had to borrow, and you have to. So I think if you borrow for the right reasons and you do it and structure it in a proper way, it's an improvement and it helps the overall community. So I think that's important to kind of realize as you go through things. So that's something that we want to make sure of, that the city really maintains and is focused on, and that we're really prudent on how we structure things. So, okay, so the next page talks about the current debt service payments. So currently, pretty much the only debt we have outstanding is 2011 bonds that were issued. Those were originally issued at about $2.4 million in 2011, or 20-year financing, average interest rate 1.6%. Obviously a great financing. Those payments you'll see there are fairly level. They rise up a little bit, but it's a fairly level structure, around $150,000 a year. Those we paid off in 2031, January 2031, and you won't have any debt after that without issuing any new debt. And so you'll see that one of the things that we talk about within the future debt is how to incorporate these payments into your debt payment and minimize the costs that you have on it. So you kind of what we refer to as wrap around. So we want to wrap around these payments to provide more of an all-in level payment structure for the city to have. And so that's kind of the structure that we really talked about. Planned funding for phase 1 and 2. Now I use the word bonds. There a lot of times it's certificate of participation is really what it is as opposed to a bond issue. I kind of use it interchangeably, so I apologize for the confusion that may cause, but whenever you hear me say bond, it's the same as a COP or a certificate of participation. A bond, technically a bond, for you to issue bonds, you have to go to voters to get approval. And so the certificate of participation allows the city to issue debt without going for that approval. But it's more of a lease type of financing. But it's very common in Missouri to use this type of structure. So when I talk about bonds or certificate of participation, that's kind of what I'm referring to. Our estimates, which you'll see a little bit later, is for the phase 1 to cost the city right around $500,000. Our current anticipation is that those funds will be paid out of funds on hand by the city. Then second phase, we believe, will be more extensive needs for the city, so we're thinking a little over $1 million for those. And so what we're contemplating right now is that the city would reimburse yourself for all of those funds that you would currently have expended, that $500,000, plus any additional needs for phase 2. So if you recall, the city adopted what's called a reimbursement resolution. And what the reimbursement resolution does, it allows the city to pay yourself back through tax exempt bonds for funds that you expend on the project. So if you don't pass that and you just issue bonds, then tax law requires you can only reimburse yourself back 90 days prior to that issuance. So by producing that or providing that reimbursement resolution, it allows you to capture more of those funds to be reimbursed. Now, you don't have to reimburse. As a matter of fact, you can say, no, we're not gonna reimburse ourselves any of it.
Can you repeat that for me?
So the reimbursement resolution that you adopted, it allows the city to reimburse yourself for any funds that you've paid out of cash for the project. And without that reimbursement, then tax law limits you to only reimburse yourself for what you expended 90 days prior to closing that financing. So it's a very short window. And we're talking about maybe possibly issuing these bonds or certificate of participation at the end of this year or the beginning of next year, a year from now, let's say. And so that's a broader time frame that you have, that you'll be expending money for these projects. And so it gives you the opportunity that you can reimburse yourselves and for those funds that have been spent, but it's not a requirement. So you can say, well, you know what, we want to reimburse ourselves $300,000, or we want to reimburse ourselves $200,000, or we don't want to reimburse ourselves at all, or cash or fine, or whatever it is. It gives you the flexibility to do that. And I think that's ultimately what we want to do, is provide as much flexibility as possible to the city. Okay. Now, phase 2, you'll see is estimated at 1.3 million. And you'll see later, we provide some scenarios for debt service payments. Those payments assume all of it. So it assumes $500,000 for phase 1, 1.3 million for phase 2. Now that might come to fruition, it might not. It might be lower, it might be a little bit higher. So those are just kind of estimates at this time. That's kind of what the model is set up for. And as I mentioned before, payments will be structured around the existing bonds to try to keep it as level as possible for the city. Also anticipate that the annual payment will be made out of the capital improvement fund that the city currently has, and would not require additional funding, so it wouldn't require a tax increase from the city. Okay. So where's the money, right? So how do you come up with those money? So this is on page 6, kind of an estimate of where those projects that we're talking about. Again, they're estimates; they're not exact. The other thing that we wanted to point out is that some of the funding incorporates planning and engineering costs for phases 3 and 4, which may or may not happen. And they also include other projects that are maybe in the pipeline that haven't been funded yet. So it just gives you a little bit more flexibility. But again, these numbers are not set in stone. This is kind of more for modeling purposes and people understanding what we're thinking about. Okay?
It says approximate improvement cost breakdown. It says includes planning and engineering costs to prepare for phase 3 and 4.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have, what do you estimate that cost to be?
That'll be later. So 3,
Okay, that's fine.
yeah. And those are years down the road. All right, so the planned debt service payments on page 7. Like I said, the black right there is the series 2011 bonds that were in the previous page. And then the gray is looking to see, okay, what the new bonds would look like. So we basically limit the payments the first few years until the series 2011 bonds are paid off, and then fill in after that. And we ran different scenarios, we ran a 10-year, 15-year, 20-year, to kind of show different items. The 15-year right now seems to be the most economic. It provides the lowest payment, the lowest interest rate, but it also gives you flexibility. The other thing I would say is that, we would look to structure in early payment option, so it's called a call feature, so that the city would be able to refinance those bonds, pay them off early, funding comes in or something like that. So it gives you a flexibility that typically is 8 to 10 years from the date that you issue it, that you have that capability.
Will that be without penalty?
That's without penalty, yeah, and that's then just principal that's outstanding at that time. So the way that the model is set up right now, the payments, all-in payments are less than $300,000 a year. Again, the idea is the current capital improvement fund, I think you're getting a little over $400,000 a year in that fund, so that these payments would be able to be made out of that fund, but without anticipating growth. So obviously growth will help provide additional flexibility. Talk about growth on page 8. This is the population growth that our models and stuff are anticipating for the next 5 years. And I think it's very modest, right? I mean, it's positive, but it's not leaps and bounds. And so I think that's one thing to recognize, that obviously if things speed up, if houses get built quicker, more houses get built, whatever it is, that will only help with the numbers. But I think that this kind of shows that we're looking for a modest growth for the first 2 phases. Okay. Now, page 9 looks at your water and sewer rate considerations. So this will probably be at a future date. You'll probably see these numbers again and have a little bit more clarity with it. But this basically shows that if you currently, the water and sewer rate, if they stay the same, even with a little bit of growth as on the previous page, you're still going to end up in some deficits coming in. And so I think that's one of the things that, as we talk about next steps, that the city should really look to do is to finalize your rate study and to adopt a plan to kind of address this. I think what you'll find is most cities benefit from gradual increases in rates for a number of years to kind of get you to the point, instead of waiting, and then all of a sudden you have this big increase. And so, I think that's something that, again, I know Cameron and his group is kind of working on for the city, but just be mindful that that's something that should be addressed. All right, timing considerations. So, as I mentioned to you, phase 1, we're thinking that we paid out the current funds on hand. As phase 1 ends and phase 2 begins, you'll have a better understanding of what the costs are associated with it, so that will kind of fine-tune the numbers that we talked about. It will also allow us then to decide on when to issue the bonds or certificate of participation to do to the next phase. And so, as I mentioned, our thought is that it'd be about a year from now that we would issue those bonds or certificate of participation. But it can move up if the development goes well and speeds up, or it can be pushed back a little bit. And I think the one thing with this is that it gives you flexibility to kind of monitor as things progress and not leap into something right away, anticipating something to happen, but being in a position to kind of watch it and monitor it as it goes through, and then you can make your decision as things kind of progress at that stage, which I think is good. And as I mentioned to you, this provides the city flexibility, right? It provides flexibility to increase the amount of debt that you issue, decrease the amount, reimburse yourself, to not reimburse yourself, to, you know, move quicker if things are moving more rapidly, or push it off by a month or 2 months or 6 months or something, depending on how things kind of progress. So, again, I think it just gives you a lot more, the strategy provides you a lot more flexibility, you know, as things kind of go forward. Future needs and planning again. You know, after the phase 2 is completed, then be looking at phase 3 and 4. And this goes to your point of how much do we expect. So what we're anticipating is that there'll be another 4 to 5 million, for phase 3, 5 to 6 million in phase 4, and that will take place in the next 5 to 10 years. So we're not talking about something immediately, we're talking about something down the road, but I think it's something that you have to plan for.
So you're estimating for phases 4,
3 and 4.
9 to 10 million for those 2 phases?
Probably about 4 years for the first phase, and then another 5 years after that, for the second phase, or for the fourth phase.
No, I'm talking about total monies.
You're improving the whole system, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're talking about, you're talking about the treatment plant
Right.
and everything?
Right.
Yes,
So,
this
so
is-
that's
this is-
interesting, the full development builds out in that 10-year period, and maybe that's 15 years out, maybe it never gets to that point, but ultimately, you know, assuming that all of your infrastructure needs upgraded, by the time that development's finished, those are kind of those are the preliminary figures that
That's taking into consideration growth, rate increases, everything.
Yeah, so that would be right, exactly. And that's something
Looked that up, right, 2.6 something 4 years ago. I went back and looked at growth up, and he just gave us
Okay.
Right.
2031. I looked back, see how much we're bringing.
We really can't look at that though, because our census shows us that we've actually lost 5%
Right.
over the years. So we can't even look at the fact that we might get a growth, because we've actually been losing since what, 2010, all over this day. So our youth are leaving, we're hoping that the older group come in and buy the homes,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
we're in trouble.
Well, and I think that you're, as you can see on the previous page on the comparison stuff, you're not alone.
Right.
There's a lot of
Yeah, I
communities with
noticed
the
that.
same,
Small towns are.
same situation. Right?
A question real quick, if you don't mind me asking, on the water treatment plant, we're showing, according to David, probably about 100. We've got apartment buildings that are popping up everywhere. Are you foreseeing that we actually will grow into this in phase 1 or 2 well before we reach phases 4 or 5?
I don't think so, kind of going back to your point about what the actual population has done. So if you go back to page 8, this is some projections that Chris and I have been working on. So what we try to do, we don't want to count on that subdivision being overly fruitful. We obviously wish it success, but basically what this does, if you run those numbers, that equates to about 100 homes being built over the course of the next 5 years. So that doesn't necessarily mean 100 McBride homes, but 100 new paying residential water and sewer customers. And those projections and some of the rate increases that we've looked at preliminarily don't account for any new commercial. They don't count on you collecting any new commercial water or sewer either, which hopefully, you know, in a perfect world, we're showing the worst case and things improve even more. But we try not to overstate the estimated growth.
Cameron, our water and sewer department also found some leaks in the main. We were running 5,000 per minute, now we're down to 2,500 per minute. That makes a huge difference with all these houses being built. We can handle that at this time, I believe.
We can.
Yeah, because we cut that way down.
We can.
Okay.
But I think, you know, that's where that 2031, that big $4 million number comes in.
Another thing I kind of wanted to make sure is clear, you know, as we're doing our rate study, we are assuming that you're going to borrow money for phase two. We're trying to set rates so that you could make a payment as though you were borrowing money for phase two. But if this growth doesn't happen as quickly, or we don't need to borrow the money, I think we hope to show you a plan that would raise rates so that you can make that debt service. But if you're able to cash flow improvements for another year, you know, Chris isn't going to force your hand to go borrow this money at any certain period of time. We just need to be ready to react if you need to. So we're going to try to kind of look at some step increases that would allow you to make payments should you need to borrow. But ultimately, if we can push the need to borrow, you know, further into the future, that's a good thing for everyone, I think. We just need to make sure that the city's in a position that if you do need to go borrow a couple $1 million, your rates are going to support that, and you don't have to react to that.
Yeah, we have to act like it's gonna happen, because McBride's not gonna slow down.
Right.
They're gonna keep putting the infrastructure in, whether we have the houses sold or build houses.
Right, and you have some project needs that have been identified, you know, separate from the McBride project that really don't have any way to fund them. So part of what we're showing in phase two is maybe we move some of these beneficial projects to the rest of the city up and try to tackle some of those over the next few years. And then, you know, ultimately phase 3 and 4 are probably more growth and development driven, whereas, you know, phase 2 is more of a immediate need that just hasn't been budgeted for in the, you know, in the recent past. There's not been a funding mechanism for some of those water and sewer projects.
Thank you.
So, the last thing I want to talk about is next steps.
What page?
This is page 12. So some of the things that the city has accomplished, you hired us. That was a great choice, by the way. You passed reimbursement resolution. I talked about that a little bit. And you hired an auditor for 25 through 27, which is really important. This next year, some things that, as you're gearing up towards the funding for phase 2, there's some things that the city should really look to do. And so that's one of the things I wanted to, bring up, and that is that your annual audits, obviously you're working on getting caught up. I think continuing to be caught up and, trying to make sure to get it completed 180 days within fiscal year end or after fiscal year end is really important, because that will really help if you need to access capital markets. Allows you to do that a lot smoother than you do otherwise. The other thing is that we've gone through and looked a little bit at your financial policies, and I think we'll continue to do that. We do have some recommendations, and we're working on with Jennifer on some of those. And those include, some of them include fund balance policy, to really maintain a good fund balance. As you go back to the different comparisons, I think it's one thing that, and as Cameron mentioned about, increasing rates and different things and stuff, making sure that you're on a really solid foundation, and that you continue to keep those foundations and grow it, as opposed to spending it down and then and not having it for future needs. Speaking of that, a transfer policy, I think is really important. It allows Cameron and his group to kind of really looking at what your projections are going to be. A little bit easier to figure out what's going to happen in the future if we have some solidity and some kind of formal policy to know that this is what's going to be transferred from one fund to the other. Obviously, you can have exceptions and there's things that happen, but I think if you have something that you try to maintain, it can be really important, that you don't have right now. I think a debt policy is really good when you're talking about, okay, when do we want to issue debt, right? And I think it's good because the policy establishes what future boards will be. Obviously, they can change in the future, but a lot of times when you have a policy, it sticks, right? And so you can determine and say, okay, this is when we have to issue debt. And if we don't, then we'll pay it out of cash. And you have different things. Or you say, well, this is when we're going to refinance our debt. you know, if we hit these bogeys, we hit these stagings kind of thing. It just puts the guardrails on the city to really think about. So those are the types of things that you might see come for action items for the board to address and to adopt. And so those are the things that we'll be working on behind the scenes. And the idea really is to build up the city to get you into a position to be as strong as possible when and if you need to borrow, that you're a very strong credit and that you're able to show that to the rating agencies, potential buyers, different things like that in debt. So the idea is to kind of take this opportunity to kind of get you to that point. And I mentioned to you about the rate study and the different changes in the rates, which I think are important to do. And lastly, continue to monitor funding needs and keep track of how things are going and make any adjustments as needed. Yeah, there were a lot of those questions that I was expecting. Maybe now we'll go to questions. So.
You know, years ago, I passed capital improvement tax and the board kind of laughed at me. I said, we need it. I figured for factories or something coming in the city of Cuba big. So I went after to pay off debts and to move the city of Cuba forward when the time came.
Yep.
Well, apparently, the time has came to use that capital improvement to improve our town and get this subdivision up.
Yep.
This was planned years ago.
Yeah.
You have to plan in years ahead.
Right.
Like you said, we knew we were going debt, you can't afford everything, but you got that capital improvement tax to make a payment and go on. We have that capital improvement forever, so we know we can afford this.
Yeah.
But without that capital improvement tax, we're in trouble.
Yep. Exactly. Right.
So good planning does a lot for our town.
Yep. Yep. Good job.
Our current debt service payments is actually $2,194,909. Let's see, 2.194.928, not 934.
Oh, that was.
Our long-term debt is 2.194.
Yeah, that includes other debt, right? So that's not just. I know you're talking about the audit, right?
Well, no, back in, we had just like we just had back in, let me see, I think when I pulled this,
I'll just pull that up.
2012, July 1st, 2012 until January 1st, 2031. Right now, our principal on that is 1.187. Interest is $73,928. The total debt right now is 1.260928. That was for back in, we had a cold snap, and we received a bill for that, and they did a long-term payback on that. That will not be paid off. I'm not sure. Jennifer, do you know when that will be paid off? Or you know?
2 months.
Not according to this, but
Which payment are you talking about?
you sent me this when I asked about long-term debt. MJM EUC deferred payment
So,
on 1.5.
That is considered part of our long-term debt according to audit purposes, but what he is specifically referring to is only the 2011 bonds. Those will be paid off, that particular bill will be paid off at the end of this fiscal year. And the other long-term debt that's showing up on the audit is considered our compensated absences, and this has to be reported as part of our debt for audit purposes. But the only debt as far as bond purposes go are the 2011 COP bonds that are for SRF.
Right, but both are long-term debt. Now, the question would be, do you see us getting bonds, or will this be another type of financing? The last we had talked, we did not know if we, because of our audits and our late audits,
Yeah.
whether or not that would affect our ability.
Yeah, so, yes, and I think that's one of the things we talked about is getting your audit stuff up to speed, which I think is really important. But these would be what are considered certificate of participation, similar to bonds, not quite bonds, but they are similar to that. And so, now the funding for that depends. So, given the size and the structure, then there's a couple ways that you can go about it. You can go out to financial institutions such as local banks and ask them to provide a loan. And some of them like to book it as a loan for their books. Sometimes they like to book it as a security, so that'd be a, you know, direct security, like certificate of participation. Either way, having a bank provide that funding, or going out to do what's called a public offering, where you would then offer the bonds out to the public, and then different investors would be able to bid in, and you would hire an underwriter to do that. And so those are really the two different options. I think that given the situation that you're in, and because you've done a very good job of getting your audits caught up, and that you're continuing on that path, and the timing that we're talking about, I think that you won't have any problem going either of those directions. And we would pretty much, you know, our recommendation would be the approach that it gives you the greatest flexibility for the lowest overall cost. And so that's kind of what we would recommend at that time.
Well, you know, you say like $3 or $4 million in that next phase 2, 3 or something.
Yeah.
If we go out for grants and get grants, that's gonna lower, if we can get
Yes,
the grants.
exactly right.
And we're going after electric, and we can water, sewer, and all that.
Yes.
So this is just the worst scenario.
Yes.
And if we go after these grants, it may not be near that.
Right, right. And I think also, talking about, especially with those phases and those costs and stuff, all of that has more to do with the treatment plants and different things. It's important that you prepare for the worst.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's where you really want to look at your rates and different user charges and stuff to anticipate these things in the future, to build up, that you have the cash and the funds there to.
Well, I assure you, if I'm Mayor of Cuba, I'm going after grants for the citizens hard. I'm gonna try to really cut this down.
Right, exactly right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Best interest for the
Yeah.
citizens.
Right,
Yeah.
100%. Did that help answer?
Thank you.
That's it.
I guess that's it.
All right. Yeah, well, my information's on there too. I encourage you, feel free to give me a call, shoot me an email, whatever you'd like, if you have any questions, or if you hear something, or if I can provide any help, or let you know, just kind of, well, I'm always open and available, so.
Thank you.
One question.
Yeah.
On the 1.3 million in phase 2, should we get started on that as soon as possible, or not?
No.
No, okay?
You should wait, I mean, because you want to make sure that that
Yeah.
is accurate, right? You don't want to, and I think the other thing that you have going for you is that we're in an environment where interest rates are fairly steady, and there's a lot of pressure for lower rates in the future. So, not to say it's gonna be a huge drop, but you're not in a situation where it's gonna cost you a lot more in interest if you wait 12 months versus whether you do it today.
Thank you.
So, yeah. Questions?
Well, good.
Thank you for the information.
All right, yeah.
Right.